After Effects pretty much boils down to six key components: compositions, layers, animation, effects, 3D, and rendering. Once you understand these six components and how they're related, you will indeed have a strong foundation to build and edit motion graphics inside of Adobe After Effects. I want to start by going to our project panel in the upper left corner of the interface here. The project panel is where you can actually import any external files to work inside of After Effects. So if we look at the top folder here in my project panel, you can see these icons. And if I click on each one of these icons, you can see it has pixel dimensions, a duration, and a frame rate. These are known as compositions. They're very similar to sequences inside of Premiere Pro. Now, whenever you want to open a composition, all you have to do is just double-click on the composition in the project panel. Now, notice when I double-clicked, I got this blue line around the bottom part of the interface here. The blue line indicates that panel as being active, and this bottom panel is the timeline. And if you just think of it for a second in your brain, the left side here is very similar to Photoshop layers, and the right side here is very similar to a sequence in a Premiere Pro sequence. So here on the left side, if I want to turn the visibility of a layer off and on, I can just go over to the eyeball and toggle that visibility off and on. Now, I can control the visual appearance of layers by adjusting their hierarchy, again, just like a Photoshop document. So if I click on layer 3 and move it to the bottom of my layers, you can see it's underneath of my video clip. So here I'll just press Command-Z to undo that. I'm telling you this because layers are used to actually build your finished composition. So the next thing I want to cover, in addition to compositions, layers. As you can see, there are different icons for each one of these layers, and that's because each different kind of layer is supported. So I have a QuickTime file for layer 4, I have an image sequence for layer 5, I have a layer solid for layer 6 that's being generated from within After Effects. Now, another cool thing about After Effects is the fact that it supports multiple resolutions. So even though my composition is set up at 1280 by 720, if I took a 1920 by 1080 video file, I could just go ahead and drag it and drop it directly into my composition. Now, if you notice in the middle of the timeline, I have these things called modes. And if I click on the pull down, you'll notice these are very much like the blend modes that you have in a typical Photoshop document. If you're not seeing these, there's a toggle switches and modes button that you want to just toggle so you can see your different blend modes. The right side of the timeline is actually divided up into time, and it gives you the ability to control the visibility of layers over time. So if you notice here, at about 11 frames, there's no logo because the logo layer hasn't started yet. As I move my current time indicator, now you can see the logo actually start to animate into the scene. So in addition to vertically controlling hierarchy, you can control the visuals horizontally over time using your sequence. Now on the right side of the interface here, you'll notice we have our Libraries panel. The Libraries panel is an integration from Adobe Creative Cloud. So if you've used any libraries in Photoshop or Illustrator, these are now integrated into Adobe After Effects, so you can drag and drop those elements into your projects. Just above my libraries is the Preview panel. The Preview panel helps preview animation, and that's the next core principle I want you to learn inside of After Effects. I'm going to go ahead and press the play button, and here you'll actually see I have an animation that's been built for my logo. The way this logo animates into the scene is through a series of things called keyframes. And keyframes record a specific amount of data at a specific point of time. That's how you create animation inside of After Effects. Just to show you some keyframes, I'm going to press the space bar to stop playback here. And I'm going to open layer 3. Once I double-clicked on layer 3, notice I have another tab open here in the timeline. This is known as a pre-composition. Technically, it's another composition that I've organized here in my project. If I open my pre-comp here, you can see it has the exact same icon as these compositions up here. So yes, you can place compositions inside of compositions. Now, if you look at these layers that actually make up this logo animation, as I scrub down the timeline here, you can see the animation that's actually happening because of these little things here, which are known as keyframes. Let's jump back to our other composition. Rather than double-clicking in the project panel here, I'll just click on this tab. If you notice, we've got a certain style applied to this background video. This was created using effects. Now, if I go down and select Layer 7, I want to go to the bottom of the timeline here and toggle my switches and modes. I have these things called switches here, and in these switches, I can control the visibility of the effects that I've applied to a layer. So this FX button will toggle those effects off and on. So notice it's these effects that I'm using to actually colorize or stylize this background footage. So effects are extraordinarily helpful inside of After Effects, and you can adjust them over time with keyframes just like anything else. I liken applying effects to working with filters inside of Photoshop. If you ever want to apply an effect, with a layer selected, you just go up under the effect panel and notice it looks very similar to the filters that you have inside of Photoshop. I'll go ahead and just close that right now. Now, the next thing we should talk about is 3D. After Effects supports two different kinds of 3D. 2D elements in 3D space, and actual 3D elements. If I open the 02 composition here with my title 3D cam, as I move my current time indicator down the timeline here, you'll notice, actually let me scrub through, you'll notice that these layers spin in 3D space. And it's this 3D rotation that's being created by enabling this switch here. So After Effects does support positioning 2D layers in 3D space. You can create moves like this. But if I actually open up the fourth composition here, you'll see I have a true 3D element. If I scrub through my comp here, you can see I've got this 3D element rotating through the scene. And this was created inside of After Effects as well. I was just using a third-party plugin called Cinema 4D Lite that actually comes bundled with the application. Now, finally, when you're finished working inside of After Effects, you need to be able to create one self-contained file that exists outside of the application. And the process to do that is called rendering. Any composition that you currently have active can be rendered. All you do is make sure that comp is active here in the timeline or selected here in the project panel. And when I go to composition, I can say add to render queue. And in here, I have a whole bunch of controls that I can go through to set up that'll actually give me the ability to create a pre-rendered QuickTime video. To show you an example of a render inside of After Effects, I'm going to navigate in my exercise files to the Assets folder. In here, if we go to the Footage folder, I have a logo render. If I double-click on that, it'll open up a self-contained QuickTime file that if I play back, you can see contains my animated logo with my stylized background. Now, as you continue working throughout After Effects, try and keep these 6 foundational areas in the back of your mind, since everything you create inside of After Effects will usually fall into at least one or more of these 6 categories.